So today I'm going to demo a project. I had a request a couple of weeks ago where somebody asked me if there was a way to display checkboxes or radio buttons in multiple columns. And they wanted 3 columns specifically. And there is a external module in REDCap called 2-column checks, but it only lets you do checkboxes. It only lets you do 2 columns, and it only works on a survey. So she wanted 3 columns, she wanted checkboxes, and then she wanted it to work on the data entry form. So I did some digging, and I found that I could mimic that functionality and give her multiple columns using the REDCap CSS injector. So I fixed her project and she was very happy with it, and I decided that it might be something that I can demo for you guys here on the Red Zone call. And so I created a separate project just to kind of go through and show you how to implement this and what kind of rules we have to set in CSS. So let me open up the designer and show you what we're working with here. So I just grabbed her multiple columns field that I had for her because it's a very extensive list of medications, as you can see. And so if you had to go through this list of medications on a form, you're going to be scrolling quite a bit, and it might help to have them displayed side by side. So that's the giant list that we have. Let me open up a record and show you how it displays. So it's similar to the design view. You see this giant list, but with the CSS applied, you see here now that there's 3 columns, and it's not as long. If it's on one page, you'd be able to go through and check all your medications, and you wouldn't have to scroll back up and down for that. I also have an example with states. So if we had a list of states and it's a radio button, and this one is set for 4 columns, and then this is the survey view. So I created one list of medications to show you how it looks without the CSS rules. And then if we go to the next page, this is the list of medications with the rule in place. You do have to do a little bit of scrolling, but it's not much compared to the first page. And then just another example with the radio buttons for the states. We have all the states here. So you don't have, a lot of times the state is a drop down, but this I just wanted as an example because I know the state names are short. And so we can actually do multiple columns here instead of just 3. So let me go to the REDCap rules. And so the external module is the REDCap CSS injector. And let me show you the rules here. So I have it enabled. I have it set for all, which is surveys and data entry forms. I only have it on this form, but if I left it blank, it would apply to all forms. And here are the rules. So let me open that up in my text editor, and let me move this over so you can see. So for some of you that are new to this, this is how I find this information for these rules. So up here, or actually rather for this medication list, if I right-click on what I'm interested in and I click Inspect, it's going to open up the Inspect tab in Chrome, and you can see here that as I'm highlighting certain things, it's highlighting what I'm looking at on the left. So I want to apply a rule that applies to this entire medication list, so that's this. And I want to apply a rule that applies to this label, because in the design view you have to make a few changes to make it look like one field. So this is the example without the CSS, and it's just a regular drop down or a regular checkbox field with the label as medical list and then a list of all the choices. So in order to make it look correct for the CSS, you have to have the label separate, because what happens when you have a label in here, and I can just add it to show you. It puts the list, it might not do it because I have the rules in place. What it did before is it put the label down in with the checkboxes, and then these checkboxes would move up. So this didn't have a separate, oh actually that's what it is. It is the rule because I'm hiding it. So let me go to, because I do hide that with the, you're hiding the label with the history buttons as well. So let me just disable this. Or actually, I want to keep it. I just want to disable the this one. There you go. So now you can see that the field label, this is the separate descriptive text field, but when I have the field label here, it has this little container that shows the label, and it has the history icons and the comments icons. So what I do is I take that label out, and then I hide this this little label, so that way it mimics that the label and the two separate fields are together. So let me go back and paste my rule back in here. So this is how I find what I need to create the rules for, and what I need to do, the only thing you have to do is create a separate field with your label, and then have your drop-down list with all your, your checkbox list. So let me fix this one again and delete that. And then the other thing is you have to have your list as left vertical, because if you do it as right vertical, it's going to put the label on the left, and then it's going to scrunch up all your checkboxes and radio buttons to the right, and then it's going to create the columns, and then they're going to be all jammed together. So you want to give yourself as much room as possible, and to do that, you would set this for left vertical so they're all aligned to the left, and then it builds the columns to the right. So let me show you the rules real quick, and it might make more sense. So the only rule that you need to create the columns is this rule up here. It's a shorthand for, in CSS, for the column, the number of columns and the column width. So you don't have to specify column width, it'll do it automatically for you, but that gives it a width to where if your window is smaller or starts shrinking to 200 pixels, it's going to automatically jump from 3 columns back to 1 column to give yourself room to display. It's not going to keep scrunching everything together to where it's unreadable. And for the data entry view, and let me go back over here and show you the record. So for the data entry view for this CSS rule, we have a label, which is this field here, and then for the survey view, we have a label up here. So the survey view is a little different because it has 2 boxes. You'll see here that there's a little box on the left, which is the column number for the, which is the column for the question numbers, and then for the label. Whereas in the design view, we don't have a question number, so we just have the label. So you have to have a rule that this is for the columns, and then we want to, so this is for the columns for the medication list, and this is for the columns for the state list. So since I'm doing 4 columns at 150 pixels, that's how you can separate from here and here. And you have to specify each field that you're creating a checkbox for. So if you have a checkbox group that doesn't have as many and you don't need the columns, it's not going to automatically apply to all your checkboxes or all your radio buttons. You're going to have to specify them one at a time. And so once again, one of these is for the this is for the survey view, and then this is for the data entry view. And then for the labels, what I'm doing is I'm hiding, because this is a separate field, but in order to make it look like this is together, I have to remove this border that's underneath here. So that's all I'm doing is I'm coloring the border the same color. This color is the same background color, so it just hides it. And then I'm setting the padding to where it gives a little bit of padding here that mimics this padding up here. So that way it looks like they're together. And this is for the data entry view right here. And you can see here this call-12. These are for the data entry views. The call-11 are for the survey views. And I have to do the same thing with the survey view. Weirdly enough, the background for the survey is slightly different than the background for the data entry view. So you have to add another hexadecimal value in there for the color, or else you'll see the border. And then I'm setting the padding to the bottom of 0, because it also, so the survey styles differently than the data entry view, and so even though this says 0, there's a space automatically in there, so I don't need to add extra padding like I do for the data entry view up here. So once I've set the label for the survey, then I'm removing the top padding because it adds padding at the top here for the survey. So there is padding in between at the bottom of this medication list, and then there's padding at the top of this cell. So I'm removing the top padding for the medication list to pull this space together so it's not so huge. And then finally on the data entry view, I'm hiding the history and comment icons down here so they don't show up and you have that big space. Now, if you don't mind that your label is pushed down a little bit and then your checkboxes come up on this side, it's up to you. And because it's a trade-off. You either get something that looks nicer or you get something that's a little more functional with the comments and the history icons. So it's a toss-up. But these are really the only rules that you need to these are the only rules that you need at the top here for the columns. But if you want to make it look nicer and have it a little more seamless, then these are really all just kind of extra to make it look better. Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
Can you, I guess I missed, how do you know that you're applying one to a survey and one to a regular data entry page? I missed how that.
Okay, no problem. So what I do is I start with, so we can do it for this one up here. And it's called, let me look at the field name. So this one's called Medication List All. And what I do is, let me close a couple of these dev tools. They open them up all the time. I'll right click, so in the data entry view, I'll right click on what I want, and then I'll scroll up to where I'm getting what I'm looking for. So right here is the So this is the label for this. And if we look down here, you'll see that this is label # label dash medication underscore list underscore all dot FL. And that .fl class for the label is what has the history and the icons in it. So what I usually do, and it takes a little bit of trial and error, but what I do in the Inspect tab is I'll click on this, and if I think this is the correct thing that I want to hide, I'll go into this element style at the top, and I'll say display none. And you see that when I put display none, that medication list label goes away. So once I find that, and I usually put important whenever I make a rule, what I'll do then is in my CSS rules, I make the label, so down here I would add this, so label # label dash medication list all dot FL. And so now I'm applying, oh, I spelled label wrong. So now I'm applying this rule to this label. And I just go through that one by one. So now if I have that rule it's missing, now I'll highlight this Inspect tab, and I'll move up until I get all of the, highlight all of the medication lists. And you can see here that when I move up to this this one, it's the label, and now I'm down in the table row, and then I'm down in the table data. So sometimes I have to figure out which one I need to be in. And then I'll go in here. So if I go into the table row and I do columns, and I'll say 3, you see that nothing happened on the left. So I can't apply the columns style to the table row. So I would go down to the next one that I see that highlights it, and then I would say columns 3, and you can see immediately that it applies. And if I want to say, 200 pixels and then important, so you'll see down here that this is # medication underscore list underscore all dash tr, and then table data label rc dot column dash 12. So what I'll do is I'll go back to my CSS rule, and if I see that up here, so if I want this to be 3, then I'll add that here. So I'll say medication list all, and that's always going to be the name of your field, and then it's going to be dash tr for table row, and then td label rc dash 12. Now this column dash 12 is for the data entry view. So if I go back to my survey, and let's go back to the first one here. If I right click on Inspect Now and go back, you'll see here that it's the same thing, medication underscore list underscore all, but this is column dash 11. So in order to apply this rule here, I would have to go into my CSS rule and add the same thing, and you can separate them by commas, and then I would just change this to 11. So if I copy this and paste it into the rules for the CSS injector and save it, then when I refresh, now this one is 3 columns, and then if I refresh the survey, then it's 3 columns as well. And you can see here that there's no label because we didn't add an extra label up there like we did for the other one. And so that's how I do the rules, is I just slowly work through each one of these, and I try to figure out, a lot of this is trial and error, like how do I hide the border? I found that if I set the border to 0, it doesn't do anything, but if I have the border, it's already at a 2-pixel border, I just change the color to match the background, then it goes away. And then I slowly just kind of tinker with the padding to make it look right. But I do everything starting from the Inspect tab and looking at the web page. So I always start here, and I always highlight what I'm looking to try to fix and try to figure out where that rule is going to get applied. And you can see here that now my rule, that it's highlighting that column, or sorry, that field automatically. So if I wanted to override it and say 4 columns, so now I'm overriding the rule that I've overwritten. But everything that's happening in this Inspect tab is only showing you what's going on live. If I refresh this page, it goes away. So I only use this to test, and once I'm happy with the rules that I've applied in this Inspect window, I'll take those rules and I'll add them to my CSS rules here, and I try to keep them organized, and things that can apply to multiple things, you can just group together with a comma. But like the state list, because I originally had it up here with the rest of these, but because I wanted to have 4 columns because it could take 4 columns and still have enough space, I broke it out and put it into a separate rule. So a lot of this is trial and error, but I tackle everything in the same sort of way every time I mess with the CSS injector.
So one of the takeaways then is that you can apply the CSS injector to multiple scenarios. One being, and there are 2 scenarios when you have a survey. One is the survey view and the other is the data entry view. And you can, by using the inspector, find what you're referencing and then apply the CSS injector to both, but you need to make sure that you're capturing the right body tag or whatever.
Right. Yeah, and there might be an instance where you want something to display, like for example, the columns up here. That rule applies to both the data entry view and the survey view. So you'll find some things that you can only apply. You only have to style once, and then you find some things like here where I have I'm styling the labels for the data entry view here, and I'm styling the labels for the survey view here because they're slightly different. Like this has the question numbers, where the data entry view doesn't deal with the question numbers. So it just depends on how you want to work it, and if you want your survey, if you want to apply it all to your data entry view, if you don't have a survey, or if you want everything to look a certain way on the survey but you don't care about it on the data entry view, it's really up to you how detailed you want to get. But it's still the same method of going through and looking at the Inspect tab and finding out what REDCap calls it when it generates it, and then how you can apply these rules to specific HTML tags that REDCap has generated for your display.
And can you show us is what you actually copied into the external module for the CSS injector, just to show us what all went into that? Was it everything that you're showing right there?
Yeah, it's this whole thing right here. Yep.
Okay. So you just copied that whole thing and pasted it into the CSS injector in the external module.
Yeah, and I work in a separate form all the time because this is as big as this window gets, and sometimes it's hard to figure out what you're looking at, especially when you have a lot of rules. So what I like to do is just work in a text editor. This is Atom. I like this because it allows me to specify what language I'm working in. So right now it's CSS, and it does color code highlighting for certain things. So I'll work on it here, and I'll add a rule, and then I'll copy and paste it, and then I usually have, like, I'll have this open on the right. So I'll have, one tab with the CSS, one tab with the record open. So if I'm doing data entry view, and then one tab with the survey, and that way I can just toggle back and forth. I'll go in here and I'll add my rules. I'll save it. I'll go over here. I'll refresh, see if it applied, and then I'll go over here and I'll refresh and see if it applied. And if it doesn't, then I'll go back and tinker with it some more. And I usually have the dev tools open, so that'll be over here as well, so I can go back and forth. Trying to have multiple things open, that way, you're not having to, you're trying to save yourself some work. And then this website is always a good resource, W3 Schools. So, I just Googled CSS columns, and there's actually a group of columns properties if you really want to get detailed up here. So this is multiple columns. You can set each one of these properties. So if you want a column count, the gap between the columns, the styles, you can apply all of these rules individually, but then there's a shorthand called columns, which allows you to do just the width and the number of columns. And so that's why I use that, is because I'm not worried about the gap and any other specific column rules. I just wanted to be able to break it up into how many columns and then what's the minimum width for the column. But this is a good resource for CSS and HTML. So you can, when you open up CSS, it gives you all these rules for CSS that you want to look at, and that's what I do. That's how I figure all this stuff out.
Awesome. Well, are there any questions then for Manuel before we close up? It's almost 2 o'clock. All right. Then in that case, I think we'll go ahead and end the meeting. Thank you all for attending. We'll be back again next week with something new to show you. And just remember, there was a lot that went into this with the CSS. Personally, I found it really interesting, but it will be posted on our website. Yeah, Mary's already asking when the video is going to be up on the website. So how this works is I get the copy of the from Zoom of the video, maybe up to 30 minutes to 3 hours later. I forward it over to Manuel, and he usually tries to get it posted within a week or so. So, look for it next week if you want to watch it again. But I think this is definitely one of those ones that'll be nice to follow along with again. Yeah, and I agree that this is so much more powerful than other ways that I've used too for multiple columns. So this is really cool. All right, I'm going to shut down then. Thanks again for coming, and we'll see you again next week.